Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Dana Scranton, and this is Entrepreneurs Without Limits, with our focus on helping you to create an authentic life of freedom. So in the past video, the one that we did here just a few days ago, what I did is I introduced 5 of the more prevalent freedoms. Well, to be exact, 4 prevalent freedoms and one that is gaining more and more priority in the minds and hearts of people. And those freedoms that I mentioned were financial freedom, time freedom, emotional freedom, location freedom, and identity freedom, where that last one is one that is getting a little more attention these days. Now, those 5 freedoms I mentioned because they were kind of the core of the responses you get when you talk to people and ask them, if you could create a freedom in your life, what would it be? Most of the time, people said financial freedom, followed by time freedom, which those two can actually interchange positions 1 or 2. Then the other one that begins to become more popular is emotional freedom, followed by location freedom. And those two tend to flip back and forth. And then finally, the 5th one was identity freedom. Now, this is one that people don't necessarily articulate in that way. You know, they say, I want to find freedom to just be who I am, to grow, to pursue the authentic me. You know, they're starting to get a little frustrated with social media and the institutions of society. They're telling them who they need to be. Well, what they're talking about is identity freedom. So those were the 5 that we covered in the last video. Here, we're going to be talking exclusively about emotional freedom. Now, why the number 2 or 3, depending on who you're talking to? Well, it's very simple because emotional freedom is actually the empowering freedom that most people truly want, and especially in today's world. Now, financial freedom is important because financial freedom opens up the flexibility of the other freedoms. And I'm not going to tell you that you can't achieve emotional freedom without financial freedom. That's not true. Financial freedom makes things easier. But in the case of emotional freedom, this is a mind, brain, heart thing. Now, from the philosophical point of view, the brain and the heart, the body combine to create the mind. The summation of all of that is what you call mind, and some people call. So that's kind of where we're going to be here. And in order to achieve emotional freedom, you need to get control of what? Your emotions, your thoughts, your actions. So it begins with a focus on being aware of your thoughts. If it's a negative thought, you trigger immediately to a positive vision to put that negative thought aside and erase it. Now, many people live in a habitual world of negative thoughts. Well, if you go to social media, news media, that's pretty much what it is. And even sports media. Look, sports is all about who doesn't win. Now, I hate to tell you this, but that is not something that supports a healthy state of emotional being. Just saying. So, in the pursuit of an authentic life of freedom, emotional freedom is very important because you need to be happy. You need to be in control of your emotions. You need to be able to be aware of, in control of, and the master of your emotions. That's something that most people don't really think about, to be honest. They don't feel good. They're feeling sad, depressed, or they're feeling just exuberant and happy. And it's just the way they are. And people say, well, that's just the way he is or she is. Well, that could be true. But you have the ability to control your emotions. Be aware of what your thoughts are. If the thought is positive, hold on to it replicate it, nurture it. If it's negative, immediately put a vision in your mind of something that brings happiness, joy, and a positive feeling to you. Train yourself to do that to erase the negative. Now, why is all that important? Because you become what your dominant thoughts contain. So if your dominant thoughts are negative, you become negative. From an emotional point of view, negative thoughts create depression, anxiety, worry. That's what you become. You become a person who is filled with anxiety, worry, depression. That paralyzes you from taking the actions you need to move forward in life. Why? Because your hypothalamus, that little thing up here in your mind that protects you from saber-toothed tigers and aggressors and the things in the world that could harm you, now goes on hyper alert status, and everything is evaluated as if it were a threat to you. That puts you in a state of scarcity. That's a problem. And the more you stay in that state, the more difficult it is to get out. You drift into the rocky shores where your boat's going to get busted up and you're going to get stranded. So this is why it's so very important to pay attention to emotional freedom. It has to be one of your priorities. To do that, it's just what I said. You have to first be aware. Then you have to inoculate yourself with the ability to quickly formulate a positive thought. And it's going to be tough for some people because it's become a habit. And you continuously do that, being aware. And it means also that you need to practice gratitude. Gratitude is a very powerful method, but there's a trick to it, okay? I know you've probably heard people say, get up every morning and write down 5 things you're grateful for. You know, look at yourself in the mirror and say, I am grateful for, and then list off a number of things. And that's all fine and good, but there's one element that's absolutely essential. Some people will argue with me on this, but I think the vast majority of people who practice gratitude realize that you've got to be in a state of emotional engagement when you're writing or articulating that for which you are grateful, because it is that emotion that transfers that energy to the ultimate intelligence, to the supreme intelligence, to the universe, if you will. Because gratitude is a form of energy. It's a form of emotional energy that communicates something that you are in favor of. It models your thoughts, it broadcasts your thoughts, and you attract your dominant thoughts. If your dominant thoughts are positive, grateful, thankful, that's what you're going to attract. Now, emotional freedom is when you have control of your mind, your brain, your body. You are in control of your thoughts. You are in control of your reactions and responses to those thoughts. That is the beginning of emotional freedom. In that case, you don't really need financial freedom to achieve emotional freedom. But financial freedom makes it easier. Why is that? Because oftentimes, people that are struggling with their finances have worry, anxiety, fear, depression. They live in a world of scarcity. They're afraid to spend. They're wondering where the next dollar is going to come from. That puts you in that defensive scarcity state. So if you overcome the financial issues, it makes it easier to overcome the emotional issues. But here's a warning. Just because you become successful bringing your finances back to a state where you might say you're financially independent, unless you adjust your emotional freedom state, your emotional state to that new financial state, you're going to lose it. Most people who live in scarcity cannot hold on to abundance. And your emotional state is either in a scarcity state or an abundance state. Now, there's a territory in between, but that's not where you want to be. You want to be in control, positive, abundant, grateful. Financial freedom makes it easier, but it doesn't make it automatic. Does that make sense? Because as an entrepreneur, one of the things that we find ourselves doing sometimes is overthinking. Now, overthinking, believe it or not, is a form of scarcity. Now, me, I was educated and trained as an engineer and experienced in that field. And many of the things I worked on had to work. There was no option for failure. No man-rated spacecraft weapon systems. They had to work. So you were educated as an engineer to what if everything, to overthink it because you'll want it to be right. Well, as an entrepreneur, that can be a little bit restrictive, especially if you're a solo entrepreneur. So it took me a while to recognize that there are two personalities. There's the engineer where you flip into the appropriate state of mind. And then there is the entrepreneur, the human, the person who recognizes these esoteric elements like scarcity versus abundance, gratitude, thankfulness, these very essential elements of success in life. They are not automatic. You have to take control and make that happen. And as an entrepreneur, that's an asset to you. Because when you're able to look at any situation, be grateful for that situation coming into your life, for the wisdom and the lessons and the teaching that it's going to give you, for the opportunity to see heretofore unseen possibilities, that right there is a very good reason to cultivate gratitude, thankfulness, a positive state of mind, to be on that side of the curve, deliberately, intentionally in control. Well, I think I've said enough on this particular topic, but I wanted to go over it because when we're talking about an authentic life of freedom, we really want to prioritize our top 5 and work on those. Financial freedom is definitely one of them. I would put emotional freedom as number 2, to be realistic. Time freedom is important because if you are constrained with how much time, then sometimes you end up compromising in areas that might be, let's just say inappropriate to compromise on. But time freedom is another. Identity freedom, followed by location freedom. Those are the 5 for me. And of course, if you look at the other video that I built there, in fact, I think it's still up. If it's not, I'll go back and bring it back up. The 12 freedoms. And that's a good one to watch. I can't see it on the screen right now, but the 12 freedoms are the 12 freedoms that most oftentimes you can have a dialogue with somebody over. We've already mentioned those 5, but there's growth freedom, change freedom, the freedom to create, the options and choices in life, the freedom to have that. So there's many different freedoms, and those freedoms come relatively easily once you have financial freedom, emotional freedom, time freedom, and identity freedom. Location freedom is not necessarily so important, although in today's paradigm, location freedom has become a priority for some because remote work, the ability to move from point A to B, where B is more desirable than A, and be able to work from that point. So location freedom is a big deal, especially up here where I live. Now, I live in a resort community, and I can tell you there's a lot of people who have moved up here during the COVID era who are working remotely. We had thousands of people move into our little valley here, and that's what they do is they work remotely. So location freedom is important to them. But to create that authentic life of freedom that gives you the options and choices to make your world a better place, to create rich experiences for the people you care about so they can see the possibilities that await them, to be able to answer those 3 great questions of life. Am I living wisely? Am I loving well? Am I serving greatly? Those freedoms, and they are freedoms to be able to say and do that, those require that you have some other things in place. Financial freedom, emotional freedom, identity freedom, and time freedom. Those four things are usually on top. So with that said, I'm going to sign off here. In the next episode, I'm going to go into the mindset of the entrepreneur, and we're going to talk about the difference between mindset and your code. Come back for that one. Stay tuned. I think you'll find that interesting. Once again, this is Dana Scranton. Step onto the frontier of possibilities. See what awaits you, and we'll see you out there.